Pay $50,000 or the wedding is off. That's what my daughter's fiancé said to me in front of 40 guests at her own engagement party. He said it with a smile on his face, like he was asking me to pass the salt. He thought I was just a simple banker, an old man in a cheap suit who counted other people's money for a living. Everyone at that party laughed when he said it. Some of them even clapped. I just smiled back at him, excused myself for 1 minute, and made a single phone call. When I walked back into that room, nobody was laughing anymore. My name is Richard Hale. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 22 years, I've worked at Merit National Bank in Charlotte, North Carolina. Most people who meet me assume I'm just another guy behind a desk, maybe a teller who moved up a little, somebody who checks account balances and stamps papers all day. I never correct them. I never need to. My daughter Emily is 26 years old. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, and until that night, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about the man she was going to marry. This is the story of how one greedy demand at a party changed everything, and how a phone call most people at that table didn't even notice brought down a man who thought money and confidence could buy him anything he wanted. I want to walk you through this from the beginning because the way it started tells you everything about how it ended. This wasn't a sudden explosion. This was months of small warning signs I chose to ignore because I wanted my daughter to be happy and because I trusted her judgment more than my own gut feeling. That trust almost cost us everything. But it also gave me the perfect front row seat to watch a con man's plan fall apart in real time, in front of his own future in-laws, in front of people he was trying to impress, in a room he thought he controlled completely. Emily met Tyler Brooks at a charity gala about a year before all this happened. He was 29, tall, well-dressed, and he talked about his investment consulting business, the way other men talk about their favorite sports team, constantly and always making it sound bigger than it probably was. He drove a black BMW that was always freshly washed. He wore watches that cost more than my first car. And every single time he came to our house for dinner, he made sure to mention some deal he had just closed, some client he had just landed, some number that was supposed to impress me. The thing is, I've spent over 2 decades around money. I've seen real wealth, and I've seen people who dress up like they have it. Tyler talked about money constantly, but he never once picked up a dinner check when we went out as a group. He always had an excuse. His card was acting up. He'd get the next one. He forgot his wallet twice in 6 months, which is a strange thing to forget when you claim to run your own business. I noticed these things. I filed them away quietly. I didn't say anything to Emily because she was glowing every time she talked about him, and I wasn't going to be the father who ruined his daughter's happiness over a few unpaid dinner bills. My wife Carol noticed things too. She mentioned once that Tyler asked a lot of questions about our house, our savings, and whether I had done well at the bank over the years. At the time, we both brushed it off as normal curiosity, the kind of thing a young man asks when he's trying to fit into a family. Looking back now, every single one of those questions was a piece of a puzzle he was building, slowly, patiently, the same way a con man always builds his case before he makes his real move. We just didn't know yet that we were the mark. The engagement party was held at the Windermere Country Club, a place Tyler picked out and insisted on paying for, though I later learned that Carol and I had actually covered the deposit, just to help out, as Tyler put it. There were about 40 guests there that night, friends from work, family from both sides, a few of Emily's college roommates. Everyone was dressed well, the champagne was flowing, and Emily looked happier than I had ever seen her in her life. I remember standing near the bar with my brother-in-law, watching my daughter laugh with her friends, thinking this was exactly how a night like this should feel. Then Tyler pulled me aside, near the end of the toasts, in front of a small crowd that had gathered around us. He had that same easy smile on his face, the one he always wore when he was about to ask for something. "Richard," he said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "I've been thinking about the wedding budget, and honestly, $50,000 would really set us up right. A nice venue, a real honeymoon, maybe even a down payment for our first place after." I asked him what he meant exactly, trying to keep my voice calm. That's when he said it, clear as day, with a laugh in his voice like it was some kind of joke between men. "Pay $50,000 or there's no wedding. Simple as that." A few people around us actually laughed, thinking he was joking, the way rich young men sometimes joke about money to sound bold. One of his friends slapped him on the back and said something like, "Smooth move." I stood there for a second, looking at this man who was about to marry my daughter, demanding money from me in front of a room full of people, treating it like a punchline. I smiled. I told him I needed a minute to think it over. Then I walked toward the hallway, pulled out my phone, and made a call that Tyler Brooks never saw coming. Here's the thing Tyler never bothered to find out, because he never asked the right questions. He just assumed. I'm not a teller. I'm not a branch manager. I am the Senior Executive Vice President of Merit National Bank, one of the largest regional banks in the Southeast, and I sit on the Risk and Compliance Board that has direct authority over account holds, fraud flags, and security freezes across every branch in 3 states. I started at that bank 22 years ago as a loan officer making $34,000 a year, working my way up one promotion at a time, one late night at a time, while raising Emily as a single father for the first 6 years of her life before I met Carol. I never talk about my job at parties. I never bring up my title, my salary, or my position, because I learned a long time ago that people change how they treat you the moment they know what you're worth. I wanted Emily to bring home a man who loved her for who she was, not for what her father controlled at the bank. So when Tyler asked those questions about whether I had done well, I gave him vague, boring answers about being in banking operations. I let him believe whatever he wanted to believe. Turns out he believed I was small, simple, and easy to push around. What Tyler also didn't know was that 2 months before this party, I had already noticed something strange. His name had come up in an internal fraud review at our bank, flagged for unusual account activity tied to a business loan he had taken out under his consulting company. I hadn't connected the dots to my daughter's fiancé right away because his paperwork used a slightly different spelling of his middle name. But that night at the party, standing in that hallway with my phone in my hand, all those pieces clicked together at once, and I realized exactly who I was dealing with. I stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom, passed the coat check, and dialed a number I know better than my own daughter's birthday, the direct line to our regional operations center. Marcus Webb picked up on the second ring. Marcus had worked under me for 11 years, and he knew my voice meant business the moment he heard it. Marcus, I need you to pull an account for me right now, under the name Tyler Brooks, business account tied to Brooks Consulting Group. I gave him the details I remembered from the fraud flag review, and within 90 seconds, Marcus had the account pulled up on his screen. Richard, this account already has a compliance flag on it from 6 weeks ago, Marcus said. Unusual deposits, inconsistent business documentation, and 2 other flagged transactions tied to different personal accounts. We were going to escalate it next week. I told Marcus to escalate it right now, tonight, under my direct authorization as the reviewing executive. I asked him to place an immediate security hold on every account under that name and every linked account, standard procedure for suspected fraud, fully within my rights and fully within the bank's own policy. Marcus didn't hesitate. Done, Richard. Hold is active as of right now. He won't be able to move a dollar until this clears review. I stood in that hallway for a moment after I hung up, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. This wasn't me being a vindictive father trying to punish a man for asking for money at a party. This was me doing my job, following the exact same procedure I would follow for any other flagged account, except this time the account happened to belong to the man trying to marry my daughter. I straightened my jacket, put my phone back in my pocket, and walked back into that ballroom with a calm smile on my face because I already knew what was coming next. I found Tyler standing near the bar, laughing with his friends, clearly proud of himself for the little scene he'd just made in front of everyone. I walked up, smiled, and told him I had thought about his offer, and that I needed a few minutes to make some arrangements. He grinned and said, "Take your time, Richard. No rush. Just don't take too long." His friends chuckled again. I patted him on the shoulder and walked away to find Carol and Emily near the dessert table, and for the next 15 minutes, I just watched. It happened right when Tyler tried to pay for a round of drinks for his friends at the bar, a small gesture meant to look generous in front of everyone. His card was declined. He laughed it off. Tried a second card. Also declined. The bartender, apologetic, told him both cards were showing a hold from the issuing bank. Tyler's smile started to fade, just slightly, as he pulled out his phone and saw a text alert about unusual account activity and a temporary security freeze. He stepped away from the bar, dialing a number quickly, his voice dropping low. Word travels fast at a party like that, especially when a man who just demanded $50,000 in front of everyone suddenly can't pay for a round of cocktails. People started glancing over, whispering, putting 2 and 2 together. The energy in that ballroom shifted from celebration to confusion in the span of about 10 minutes. Emily walked over to me quietly and asked if I knew what was going on with Tyler's cards. I looked at my daughter, and for the first time that whole night, I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. "I think you and I need to sit down somewhere quiet," I told her. "There's some things about Tyler I need you to know." Tyler came storming back over to where Emily and I were standing, his face red, his composure completely gone. "Richard, what did you do?" he said, loud enough that a small circle of guests turned to watch. I kept my voice calm and even, the same voice I use in board meetings when someone is trying to bully their way through a bad decision. I didn't do anything except my job, Tyler. Your account got flagged for suspicious activity, and it's under review. That's standard procedure. He laughed, but it wasn't the same easy laugh from before. This one had an edge to it, a kind of panic dressed up as confidence. You think you can just freeze my money because you don't like me? He said, stepping closer. I didn't step back. I didn't freeze anything because I don't like you, Tyler. Your account was flagged 6 weeks ago for irregular deposits and mismatched business documentation. That review was already happening before tonight. His face changed the moment I said 6 weeks ago, because that meant this wasn't something I cooked up out of anger at the party. This was already sitting in a file somewhere, waiting. Guests around us had gone quiet, phones lowered, drinks forgotten, everyone watching this unravel in real time. Emily stood next to me, arms crossed, looking at Tyler like she was seeing him for the first time. Tyler, is that true? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. He tried to backpedal, saying it was a misunderstanding, that his accountant handled all that it was probably a clerical error on the bank's side. But the more he talked, the more his story kept shifting, and the more people around us started exchanging looks. A con man's biggest weakness is that he needs the story to keep working perfectly, every single time, in front of everyone, and Tyler's story was falling apart in real time in front of 40 witnesses. 3 days after the party, I sat down with Marcus and our internal fraud team to go through the full file on Tyler Brooks, and what we found was worse than I expected. This wasn't Tyler's first time asking a future father-in-law for a large sum of money right before a wedding. Through some careful digging, cross-referencing his consulting business records with other flagged accounts, Marcus found 2 other cases in the past 4 years where Tyler had been engaged, both times to women from families with money. Both times the engagement ended right around the time large sums were requested and then denied. In one case from 2 years earlier, a family in Raleigh had actually wired Tyler almost $30,000 for a wedding venue deposit that never existed, money that instead went straight into paying off his personal debts and funding the lifestyle he used to impress women like my daughter. The wedding in that case never happened either. The woman broke off the engagement after discovering the truth, but by then the money was already gone, and Tyler simply moved on to his next target. His consulting business, as far as we could tell from the paperwork, brought in almost no real income at all. Nearly everything about his lifestyle, the car, the watches, the country club memberships, was funded by loans, credit, and money pulled from people who trusted him. I brought this information to Emily myself, sitting at our kitchen table with printed pages laid out in front of her, letting her read through it at her own pace instead of just telling her what to think. I watched my daughter's face go through anger, disbelief, and finally a kind of quiet heartbreak as she realized the man she had planned to spend her life with had been running the same con, with small variations, on at least 2 other families before hers. He wasn't in love with me, she said quietly. He was in love with what he thought you had. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand over hers and let her sit with it. Emily wanted to confront Tyler herself, and I respected that enough to let her lead, though I sat with her at the meeting, at a quiet coffee shop away from both our families, just in case things got difficult. Tyler showed up looking like he hadn't slept much, his usual polish gone, replaced by the tired, defensive look of a man who knows he's been caught. Emily slid the printed pages across the table to him, the same ones I'd shown her, the Raleigh family, the pattern of engagements, the consulting business with almost no real clients. Tyler tried a few different angles. First denial, claiming the documents were wrong, then anger, accusing me of digging through his private records out of spite, then finally, when neither of those worked, something closer to the truth. He admitted his business had been struggling for over a year, that he'd taken on debt he couldn't pay back, and that yes, he had asked for money from a previous fiancé's family before things fell apart. He tried to frame it as desperation, not malice, tried to make it sound like circumstances had backed him into a corner rather than a choice he had made on purpose, more than once, with more than one family. Emily listened to all of it without saying much, her arms crossed, her face steady in a way that made me proud, even in that painful moment. When he finished talking, she asked him one simple question. Did you ever actually love me, or did you just love the idea of what my father's money could do for you? Tyler didn't answer right away, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. She stood up, took her engagement ring off her finger, set it on the table in front of him, and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back, and I followed right behind her, feeling like the luckiest father in the world to have raised a daughter with that much strength. The weeks after the broken engagement were hard on Emily in ways I hadn't fully expected. It wasn't just heartbreak over losing Tyler, it was the deeper sting of realizing she had been a target, that someone had studied her, courted her, and planned around her family's money the whole time, wearing love like a costume. She stayed with Carol and me for a few weeks, and some nights I'd hear her crying quietly in her old childhood bedroom, and I'd sit outside her door for a minute before deciding whether to knock, the same way I used to when she was 16 and going through her first real breakup. What helped Emily most, oddly enough, was hearing about the other woman from Raleigh. Through some careful, respectful outreach from our fraud team, we learned her name was Danielle, and she had gone through almost the exact same thing 2 years earlier, minus the dramatic party scene. Emily reached out to her privately, and the two of them talked for hours on the phone, comparing notes, realizing just how calculated and rehearsed Tyler's whole approach had been. There's a strange kind of comfort in knowing you weren't foolish, that you were up against someone who had practiced this exact routine before, and Emily started to heal once she understood that this wasn't a reflection of her judgment, it was a reflection of Tyler's design. Meanwhile, our fraud and compliance team formally referred the full pattern of Tyler's activity, the fabricated business records, the fraudulent loan applications, the pattern with Danielle's family, to the appropriate authorities, since this had moved well beyond an internal bank matter into actual criminal fraud territory. I made sure Emily knew this wasn't about revenge on my part. It was simply the natural result of a man who had built his entire life on lies finally running out of new families to lie to. Slowly, month by month, I watched my daughter come back to herself, stronger, more careful, but still every bit as warm and open as she'd always been. 6 months after that party, Tyler Brooks was formally charged with fraud related to falsified business loan documents, the same documents our internal review had originally flagged. Once the investigation opened up, it didn't stay contained to just our bank. Other financial institutions where he'd taken out loans under his consulting company started reporting similar red flags: inflated income statements, fake client contracts, and a business that on paper looked profitable but in reality brought in almost nothing. Danielle's family, once they learned about the ongoing investigation, came forward as well, providing records of the $30,000 they had lost 2 years earlier. Tyler's country club membership was suspended within weeks once word got around, and in a town where reputation moves faster than fact, people who once admired his confidence and his flashy car started keeping their distance, unwilling to be associated with a man now facing multiple fraud charges. His BMW, we later learned, had actually been leased under a business account that was also part of the fraud investigation, and it was repossessed less than 2 months after the engagement ended. The image he had spent years carefully constructing, the successful young consultant with money and confidence, collapsed almost as fast as it had been built, because none of it had ever been real in the first place. I felt something complicated watching all of this unfold. Not joy exactly, because there's nothing joyful about watching a person's life fall apart, even someone who tried to hurt my family. But there was a deep, settled kind of relief, knowing that Emily had gotten out before any real money changed hands, before a wedding happened, before years of her life got tied to a man who saw her as nothing more than a path to her father's paycheck. The system worked the way it was supposed to work, slowly, carefully, built on facts rather than anger, and in the end, Tyler's own greed and impatience were what exposed him, not some elaborate scheme on my part, just a simple phone call and a policy I'd have followed for any flagged account. A year after that engagement party, Emily met someone new, a guy named Marcus, no relation to my coworker. Funny enough, a high school science teacher who drove a used Toyota with almost 100,000 miles on it and had absolutely no idea what I did for a living until Emily told him months into dating, almost as an afterthought. When she told me that story, laughing, I felt something in my chest settle completely, because that's exactly the kind of reaction I'd always hoped for. Someone who loved her for entirely ordinary, unremarkable reasons that had nothing to do with money at all. Carol and I had dinner with Emily and Marcus a few weeks later, and I watched him split the bill without being asked, laugh at Carol's terrible jokes, and ask Emily thoughtful questions about her actual day, rather than steering every conversation back toward himself. It was such a small, quiet contrast to how things used to feel, but it meant everything. Emily seemed lighter around him in a way she hadn't been in a long time, not performing happiness for an audience, just genuinely comfortable, genuinely herself. As for the bank, that flagged account review became something of a case study internally, a reminder to our compliance team of why we follow procedure carefully and consistently, regardless of who's involved or how uncomfortable it might feel in the moment. I never told anyone at work the personal side of that story, that the flagged account belonged to my own daughter's fiancé, because it never needed to be office gossip. It just needed to be handled correctly, and it was. Some nights, sitting on the porch with Carol, I'd think about how differently things could have gone if I'd stayed quiet that night at the party. if I'd let embarrassment or politeness keep me from making that one simple call. If there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to this story to take away, it's this. Pay attention to the small things, the unpaid dinner checks, the constant questions about money, the way someone talks about wealth like it's the main character in every conversation. Those small details are rarely accidents, and they almost always add up to something bigger if you're willing to look at them honestly instead of explaining them away because you want someone to be good. I ignored those signs for almost a year because I wanted Emily to be happy, and it turns out the most loving thing I could have done was pay closer attention, not less. I also learned something about myself that night, something I probably needed to relearn after 22 years of playing my career quietly and keeping my head down at family gatherings. There's nothing wrong with staying humble, with not bragging about your title or your paycheck at parties, but there's also nothing wrong with using exactly what you've earned to protect the people you love when it actually matters. I didn't freeze Tyler's account out of spite or revenge. I did it because it was the right call, professionally and personally. And sometimes those two things line up perfectly when you've spent your whole life trying to do things the right way. Emily is happy now, genuinely, quietly happy, in a way that has nothing to do with country clubs or expensive watches, or men trying to impress a room full of strangers. Carol and I still talk about that party sometimes, usually with a laugh now instead of the tension we felt at the time, remembering the exact look on Tyler's face when that bartender told him his card had been declined twice in a row. If you ever find yourself in a room full of people laughing at you because someone underestimated who you really are, remember, you don't have to raise your voice or make a scene. Sometimes the quietest, calmest people in the room are the ones holding all the real power, and all it takes is one phone call to prove it. Thanks for listening to this one all the way through. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one.